I'm sorry, sir. Your name isn't on the guest list. The young wedding coordinator looked down at her tablet, her brow furrowing as she swiped through the screen once, then twice, and then a third time. I forced a small, polite smile, trying to keep my voice steady. I must be at the wrong entrance, or perhaps there's a mix-up with the spelling. Hale. H-A-I-L. Richard Hale. She shook her head, a look of genuine pity creeping into her eyes. No, sir. I've checked the entire seating assignment for every table in the ballroom. I don't see your name anywhere on the roster. Around me, laughing guests in tailored tuxedos and satin dresses glided past the velvet ropes through the grand arched doorways. Waiters in white gloves carried silver trays loaded with crystal champagne flutes. From somewhere deeper inside the venue, a string quartet was softly playing "Can't Help Falling in Love." Then, through the tall glass doors, I saw him. My son, Daniel. He was standing beneath a massive crystal chandelier, looking sharper than I'd ever seen him in a navy suit, holding a glass of champagne and smiling brightly for a photographer alongside his new bride, Emily. He was laughing, a big, full-chested laugh that I recognized instantly from his childhood. He never looked toward the entrance. He never turned his head toward the foyer where I stood less than 50 feet away. Or maybe he did, and simply chose not to see me. Before I tell you my story, please leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you're new here, welcome to Father's Raw Justice. I tightened my grip on the wrapped walnut jewelry box I'd been holding against my chest. I had commissioned a local craftsman in East Tennessee to build it out of solid walnut, a hand-carved keepsake box. Inside, I had carefully placed my late wife Linda's handwritten recipe cards. Emily loved baking, and Linda had always hoped those worn, flour-dusted cards would be passed down to our future grandchildren. "Would you like me to call the event manager?" the coordinator asked, her voice dropping to a sympathetic whisper. "Or maybe someone from the bridal party?" I took one last look through the glass doors. Emily's parents were being escorted to the head table near the stage. Her uncles, her aunts, her cousins from out of state, they were everywhere, laughing, celebrating, taking photos. But somehow, the father of the groom had no place in the room. "No," I answered quietly, stepping back from the velvet rope. "Thank you, miss. I think I've seen enough. My name is Richard Hale. I'm 68 years old, a retired civil construction supervisor, widowed, and until that warm Saturday evening in Tennessee, I believed there wasn't a single thing I wouldn't do for my only son. Looking back now, that 4-hour drive home from Nashville back to Knoxville probably changed both our lives forever. I'd left my house long before sunrise that morning because I didn't trust the weekend traffic around the city. At my age, driving long distances after dark wasn't my favorite thing to do. But for Daniel, I would have driven across the entire country without a second thought. The dark navy blue suit I was wearing was the exact same suit I'd worn at my wife Linda's funeral 3 years earlier. She had bought it for me for our 40th wedding anniversary. "It's timeless, Richard," she had said back then, while gently straightening my silk tie in the mirror. "You'll wear this to every important family occasion we have left." She wasn't wrong. I just never imagined that one of those important family occasions would end with me sitting alone in the cab of my old Ford pickup in a dark parking lot outside a wedding venue. The gift beside me on the passenger seat stayed unopened. I turned the key, listened to the engine rumble to life, and cleared my throat. There were no dramatic tears, no outbursts of anger, just a heavy, hollow silence. Daniel wasn't always like this. Growing up, he was the kind of boy who would wave goodbye twice from the window before getting on the school bus. When Linda got sick with cancer 4 years ago, he spent almost every weekend coming home from college to help around the house. He mowed the lawn without being asked. He sat by his mother's bedside, reading to her when the pain medication made her eyes too heavy to stay open. Back then, I thought Linda and I had done something right. I thought we had raised a man who understood what family meant. After college, Daniel started a small residential construction company. Business was decent at first, but then came rising material costs, a couple of bad estimates on custom builds, and one commercial subcontractor who walked off a job site halfway through, taking $30,000 of Daniel's capital with him. By the time he and Emily bought their first home outside Franklin, Tennessee, things were already getting dangerously tight. I never wanted them to start their marriage under a mountain of crushing debt, so I quietly stepped in. Half of their down payment came straight out of my retirement savings. Daniel had gripped my hand back then, his eyes red-rimmed, swearing he would pay me back every single penny as soon as the company stabilized. I just smiled, clapped him on the shoulder, and told him to focus on building his life. A year later, his cash flow got even worse. He called me one Tuesday evening, his voice cracking with embarrassment. "Dad, I hate asking this, I really do." "You don't have to hate it, son. What's going on?" "I might fall behind on the mortgage this month. If the bank hits my credit score now, my commercial vendors will pull my credit line." "How much is the monthly payment?" He hesitated. "It's right at $2,000. Look, I'll figure something out." "You just did," I told him. That was the beginning. What started as one emergency mortgage payment became another 2 months later, and then another. Eventually, to save him the embarrassment of having to call me and ask every 4 weeks, I simply went down to my local bank branch and set up a recurring automatic monthly transfer directly from my checking account to his lender. Daniel never asked about it again, and neither did I. For 3 years, 36 consecutive months, I paid $2,000 every single month for a house I didn't live in. I didn't do it because I was a wealthy man, far from it. I had a modest pension from 35 years of supervising road crews, my Social Security, and the modest savings Linda and I had carefully built over 4 decades. Every single $2,000 transfer meant postponing repairs on my own roof. It meant skipping vacations, keeping my old truck for another 50,000 miles, and watching every dollar at the grocery store. But I never regretted it. Helping your child isn't supposed to feel like a burden. At least, that's what I'd spent 3 years telling myself. About halfway back to Knoxville, I pulled into a quiet highway rest area. I sat under the dim amber streetlight, opened the walnut keepsake box, and ran my fingers across Linda's recipe cards. Her neat, patient cursive handwriting looked exactly as I remembered it. She used to tell Daniel something whenever he made a mistake as a boy. "Character isn't measured by how you treat people when everyone is watching, Daniel. It's measured by how you treat the people who will love you anyway." I wondered, sitting there in the dark truck cab, if he had completely forgotten those words, or if I had simply failed to teach them to him properly. I reached my house close to midnight. The porch light was still on, casting a warm glow across the empty driveway. I walked inside, hung my funeral suit back in the closet, and placed the unopened walnut box on Linda's old sewing table in the hallway. Then, I walked into the small spare room I used as an office and turned on my desktop computer. I logged into my online banking portal. There it was. Right near the top of the scheduled transactions list, automatic mortgage transfer, Shed, first of month, amount $2,000. I stared at the glowing blue text on the screen for almost a full minute. No anger, no dramatic speeches written in my head, no yelling. I simply clicked, "Cancel recurring payment." A small pop-up box appeared on the screen. "Are you sure you want to permanently cancel this recurring transfer?" For the first time in 3 years, my answer wasn't difficult at all. I moved the cursor and clicked, "Yes." I shut down the computer, turned off the hallway lights, and went to bed, knowing that somewhere 200 miles away in Franklin, Tennessee, my son had no idea his life was about to become very different. The first morning after the wedding, I woke up expecting to feel angry. Instead, I felt lighter. Not happy, not vindicated, just lighter. For 3 years, I had carried a responsibility that was never mine to carry. Every single month, before I paid my own property taxes, before I checked my own retirement investments, I had made sure Daniel and Emily's mortgage payment reached the bank on time. I had never thought of it as charity. I had thought of it as fatherhood. At least, that's what I'd spent 36 months telling myself. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat on my back porch, watching the morning fog lift over the small patch of woods behind my house. A pair of cardinals landed on Linda's old bird feeder near the white picket fence. She had loved those birds. She used to say they reminded her that someone was always watching over us, even when the world felt quiet and empty. I wished she were sitting beside me now. She would have known exactly what to say. Life quickly settled into a familiar, quiet rhythm. Monday mornings, I volunteered at the local Habitat for Humanity warehouse, helping sort donated lumber and hardware. Tuesday afternoons, I met 3 retired friends at the local diner for cheap coffee and bacon. On Wednesdays, I mowed my lawn and trimmed the hedges. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary, just ordinary American retirement. Only one thing had changed. My checking account no longer lost $2,000 at the beginning of every month. I hadn't realized how much breathing room that gave me until I looked at the bank statement 3 weeks later. For the first time in years, I didn't have to calculate whether I could afford new tires for my truck. I scheduled repairs on my water heater that Linda had wanted me to fix before she passed. I even bought myself a comfortable recliner, replacing the worn-out armchair I'd used for 20 years. Every purchase came with a slight pang of guilt, followed immediately by a quiet realization. I didn't stop being a father. I simply stopped paying someone else's bills. Daniel never called, not after the wedding, not to ask whether I had made it back to Knoxville safely, not to explain why I'd been stopped at the door, not even to thank me for the gift he never received. At first, I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe the wedding planner made a mistake. Maybe Daniel thought I'd been seated somewhere else. Maybe. But every passing day made those excuses harder to believe. A person who truly cared would have picked up the phone. 1 day, 2 days, a week, anything. Silence has a way of revealing the truths that polite words try to hide. Then, 2 weeks after the wedding, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was a formal, certified letter from Nashville. The return address read, Lakeside Event Planning and Coordination. I sat at my kitchen table and opened it. Inside was a handwritten note from the young coordinator who had checked my name at the entrance, along with several printed documents. Her letter was brief. Mr. Hale, I'm writing this because I haven't been able to sleep since Saturday night. You were so polite when I told you your name wasn't on the list, but something felt wrong. After the reception ended, I reviewed the original planning files. You deserve to know that this was not a clerical error. Attached to her note was a copy of the final seating chart revision submitted 3 days before the wedding. There it was, printed in black ink near the head table. Table 2, Richard Hale. And right across my name, someone had drawn a heavy black line with a permanent marker. Handwritten beside it were 3 words in my son's distinct handwriting: remove, reassign, seat. Below it, my seat had been given to Harold Whitman, a wealthy commercial real estate developer and business associate of Emily's father. Attached to the chart was a printed email from Daniel to the coordinator. Please make the adjustment we discussed. My father won't be attending, and we need table 2 cleared for Mr. Whitman's associates. I folded the papers neatly, placed them back inside the envelope, and slid them into the kitchen drawer beside Linda's old Father's Day cards. No anger, no tears, just confirmation. Exactly 1 month after the wedding, my phone buzzed while I was grocery shopping at the local Kroger. I pulled it out of my pocket, expecting a pharmacy reminder. It was a text message from Daniel. For a fraction of a second, my heart lifted. I thought maybe he had finally realized what he'd done. Maybe this was the apology. Maybe he was calling to ask if we could sit down and talk. I opened the message, 4 words. Dad, the mortgage is due. That was it. No, how are you? No, I'm sorry about the wedding. No, can we talk? Just 4 cold words. Dad, the mortgage is due. I stood in the middle of the cereal aisle while shoppers pushed their carts past me. A woman accidentally bumped my shoulder with her basket, turning instantly with an apologetic smile. Oh, I'm so sorry, sir. It's all right, I told her quietly. She had apologized faster than my own son had in 4 weeks. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, finished my shopping, bought my groceries, and drove home. I unpacked the bags, fed the birds on the back porch, washed my coffee mug, and dried it with a hand towel. Only after everything was done did I pick up my phone again. I read his text one last time. It didn't sound like a son talking to his father. It sounded like an executive reminding accounting that an invoice was overdue. I typed 6 words in reply. I suppose you should pay it. I read them twice. No insults, no lectures, no passive aggression, just the plain truth. Then I pressed send. The response was instantaneous. My phone began ringing in my hand. Daniel. I didn't answer. I set the phone on the counter and let it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it rang again, then a 3rd time. 5 missed calls in 15 minutes, then a 6th, then a 7th. Finally, a text message popped up. Dad, answer your phone. This isn't funny. The bank says the transfer didn't go through. Call me ASAP. Still no apology, still no mention of the wedding. The mortgage was still more important to him than his father. I turned the phone face down on the kitchen island, picked up my garden shears, and went outside to trim the hedges along the driveway. About an hour later, my neighbor Frank wandered over from across the street, carrying 2 fishing rods over his shoulder. "You still good for Saturday morning, Richard? The weather report says the bass are biting up at Norris Lake." "I wouldn't miss it, Frank," I said, wiping my forehead with a handkerchief. Frank looked at me carefully, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You doing all right, man? You look a little quiet today." I smiled faintly. "Frank, have you ever spent years solving someone else's problems, only to realize they thought it was your job?" Frank chuckled, shaking his head as he leaned against his truck. "I've got 3 grown daughters, Richard. I know exactly what that feels like." "Then you know," I said. "The hardest part isn't learning how to help, it's learning when to stop." That evening, curiosity finally got the better of me. I sat in my new recliner and played Daniel's first voicemail. His voice came through the speaker, strained and agitated. "Dad, I don't know what's going on, but the bank says the recurring payment failed. There must be some kind of glitch with your account. Call me as soon as you get this." A glitch. He honestly believed it was a banking error. Not once did he wonder whether the man paying his bills had a reason to stop. Not once did he ask whether I was hurt, only whether the money had arrived. I deleted the voicemail, turned off the phone, and looked out the living room window as the sun sank below the trees. For the first time since Linda died, I realized something painful. I hadn't just been paying my son's mortgage. I had been quietly financing the illusion that his actions had no consequences. And sooner or later, every illusion comes due. The knocking started just after 8 o'clock on a cool Saturday morning. 3 hard, heavy knocks against the front door, a short pause, and then 3 more. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, reading the local paper, but I already knew who it was. My neighbor Frank wasn't due to go fishing until 9, and Frank always sent a quick text before coming over. Daniel never texted before showing up. Entitled people rarely consider whether someone else is ready for them. I set my coffee mug down on the counter, walked down the hallway, and opened the door. Daniel stood on the porch looking completely exhausted. His hair was messy, his beard hadn't been trimmed in days, and there were dark purple circles under his eyes that made him look 15 years older. He was wearing a rumpled button-down shirt that looked like he'd slept in it. "Dad," he said, his voice hoarse, "good morning." He stood there awkwardly on the welcome mat, leaning his weight from one foot to the other as if waiting for me to step aside and invite him inside like I always used to. I simply held the door open, my hands resting calmly at my side. "Come in, Daniel." He walked into the hallway of the house he'd grown up in. He hadn't visited in over 6 months. He stopped in the entryway, looking around the living room as though he were seeing it for the very first time. My wife Linda's handmade quilt still rested across the back of the sofa. The framed family photographs from our beach trips 20 years ago still lined the wall. The grandfather clock his grandfather had given us still chimed in the corner. "You've kept everything exactly the same," he muttered, almost to himself. "I like remembering where I come from," I said quietly. Neither of us sat down immediately. Daniel shifted his weight, clearing his throat loudly before turning to face me. "Dad, we need to talk about the bank. The loan officer called me yesterday afternoon. She said our mortgage payment is 30 days past due. They're adding late fees, and if it hits 60 days, they're going to report it to the credit bureaus and flag the loan for default." "I know," I said. He blinked, taken aback by how calm I sounded. "You know, Dad, you canceled the recurring transfer. The banker confirmed it was canceled from your end on the night of, well, a month ago." "I canceled it on the 1st of the month," I replied evenly. "Why?" he asked, throwing his hands up in genuine confusion. "Did something happen with your accounts? Did your pension get delayed? Why didn't you just tell me instead of letting the payment bounce?" I looked at him for a long, silent moment. The fact that his mind still jumped straight to a technical error, that he couldn't even imagine an emotional or moral reason why I would stop paying, was like a cold needle in my heart. "Sit down, Daniel," I said, pulling out a wooden chair at the dining room table. He sat down, crossing his arms tightly over his chest like a defensive teenager. "If you needed help with your own expenses, Dad, you could have just said something. You didn't have to cut off my mortgage without warning." Daniel, I asked softly, resting my hands flat on the wooden tabletop. Why wasn't I at your wedding? The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Daniel's posture immediately collapsed. His eyes dropped to the hardwood floor, avoiding mine. Dad, it wasn't supposed to happen like that, he stammered. Then tell me how it was supposed to happen, I said. Because I drove 4 hours to Nashville. I put on the suit I wore to your mother's funeral. I brought a handmade gift for you and Emily. And when I reached the ballroom doors, the venue coordinator told me my name wasn't on the guest list. So tell me, Daniel, how was it supposed to happen? The planner made a mistake, Daniel said quickly, the words tumbling out of his mouth like a script he'd rehearsed on the drive over. It was chaotic, Dad. Hundreds of people, vendors everywhere, seating arrangements changing at the last minute. It was just a huge misunderstanding. I nodded slowly, letting his words sit in the quiet room. I see. A misunderstanding. Yes, he said, looking relieved, thinking I was buying his excuse. Exactly. It was just crazy. So why didn't you call me the next day? I asked quietly. His relief vanished instantly. What? You had 4 weeks, Daniel. 28 days. You didn't call to ask if I made it home safely after driving 4 hours in the dark. You didn't call to ask why I wasn't in the room when you cut the cake. You didn't call once until your mortgage payment failed. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. There wasn't a good answer, because there wasn't one at all. I'm sorry, he finally whispered. It sounded automatic, hollow, like an apology you give someone after accidentally stepping on their shoe in a crowded hallway. Are you sorry because you hurt me? I asked calmly. Or are you sorry because your $2,000 mortgage payment disappeared? Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. Daniel frowned, turning toward the front door. Are you expecting someone? I don't think so, I said, standing up. I walked to the front door and pulled it open. Standing on the porch was Emily. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, holding a small bakery box in her hands. When she saw me, her cheeks turned bright red, and she looked down at her shoes in deep embarrassment. Richard. Hi, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw Daniel's truck in the driveway. I didn't know if I should come up, but I wanted to bring these. She held up the bakery box. Cinnamon rolls. Daniel mentioned once that Linda used to bake them on weekend mornings. Hello, Emily, I said gently. Come inside. We all sat around the dining room table. The box of cinnamon rolls sat unopened in the center, untouched. Emily looked at Daniel, then turned to me, her eyes filled with genuine distress. Richard, I owe you an apology. I found out yesterday afternoon. Daniel never told me you were the one making the mortgage payments. Silence slammed down on the room. Daniel froze, staring directly at his hands. Emily continued, her voice trembling slightly. For 3 years, I thought Daniel's construction company was covering our house. He told me the business was doing well enough to handle all our household bills. I had no idea that every single month your bank account was paying our mortgage. I was trying to protect you, Emily, Daniel snapped, his face flushing dark red. I was trying to keep you from stressing out while the company was transitioning. Protecting me from what? Emily asked, turning on him, her eyes wide with disbelief. From knowing the truth? You let your widowed father pay $2,000 a month for 3 years while you bought luxury golf memberships and designer suits to impress clients? I didn't ask him for the money, Daniel shouted, slamming his hand on the table. He set up the transfer himself. Because you called me crying that your credit score was about to be ruined, I said, my voice rising for the very first time, firm and unyielding. Because I loved you enough to make sure you didn't lose your first home. But I didn't pay your mortgage for 3 years so you could pretend to be a big shot while treating your own father like trash. Daniel bit his lip and looked away, unable to meet my eyes. And who decided I shouldn't be at the wedding? I asked, looking back and forth between the two of them. Daniel spoke instantly. I told you, it was a coordinator mistake. I stood up, walked into my small office, and pulled the certified envelope out of my desk drawer. I returned to the dining room and laid the printed papers flat on the table right between Daniel and Emily. Read it, I said. Emily reached for the papers first. She read the handwritten letter from the coordinator, her mouth slowly falling open. Then she flipped to the attached seating chart document. Near the head table, printed in neat black ink, was Table 2, Richard Hale. Across my name, a thick black line had been drawn in marker. Beside it, in Daniel's sharp handwriting, were the words, "Remove. Reassign seat to Harold Whitman." Emily looked up from the paper, her eyes filled with absolute horror as she stared at her husband. "Harold Whitman? That's my father's commercial real estate partner." Daniel buried his face in his hands, completely silent. "You crossed your father's name off the list," Emily said, her voice shaking violently as tears began streaming down her face. "You literally removed your own dad from our wedding. To give his chair to a business contact?" "He was helping pay for the reception venue, Emily," Daniel choked out, his voice cracking. "His firm gave us a $10,000 wedding gift. He wanted extra seats at the front for his executive team, and the venue was at max capacity. I didn't know how to tell him no." "So you decided to erase your father instead?" Emily whispered, looking at him as if he were a complete stranger. "My parents asked me 3 times on the wedding day where Richard was. You told me he was sick at home with the flu. You lied to me, you lied to my family, and you threw your father away for a networking opportunity. I thought I could fix it later," Daniel sobbed, pressing his palms against his eyes. "I thought I'd make it up to him." I sat back down in my chair, looking at my son with a deep, quiet sadness. "You didn't just reject me at the door, Daniel," I said softly. "You sold my seat for $10,000. Emily stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. She wiped the tears from her face, grabbed her purse, and walked straight out the back door onto the porch, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. Daniel remained sitting at the table, his head hanging low, surrounded by the paper trail of his own choices. For the first time in his life, there was no excuse left to make, no lie left to tell, and no father waiting to step in and save him from the consequences. Emily stayed out on the back porch for nearly 15 minutes. Through the kitchen window, I could see her standing beside Linda's old rosebush. The red petals were in full bloom against the white wooden fence. Linda used to spend hours tending those roses every spring. She always said that if you gave something care, patience, and pruning, it would eventually find its way back to blooming. Sometimes people are like that. Sometimes they just need to face the frost first. Inside, the house was dead quiet. Daniel remained frozen in his chair, his eyes fixed on the copy of the seating chart resting on the table. The thick black line through my name seemed to burn right through his pride. "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't answer right away. I pulled out my chair and sat back down across from him. "Yes, Daniel?" "I don't expect you to forgive me." He swallowed hard, wiping a tear from his cheek. I don't even know who I was trying to be anymore." "You were trying to look like a success," I said softly, "instead of being one." "I was terrified," he choked out. "Terrified that Emily's family would look at me and see a guy running a failing business. Terrified that people would think I couldn't provide. So every time a bill came, I looked away. And every time you paid the mortgage, I told myself I'd make it up to you next month." "Character isn't measured by how you perform when everything is easy, Daniel," I reminded him quietly, using Linda's words one last time. "It's measured by what you do when the performance ends." The screen door opened and Emily walked back into the kitchen. Her eyes were red, but her jaw was set firm. She didn't look at Daniel. She looked directly at me. "Richard," she said, her voice steady. "I called my parents." Daniel looked up, panic flaring in his eyes. "Emily, please." "I told them the truth," she continued, ignoring him completely. "I told them that Richard wasn't sick on our wedding day. I told them that you removed your father's name from Table 2 to make room for Harold Whitman's partners. And I told them that Richard has been paying our mortgage for 3 years while you bought luxury watches." Daniel buried his face in his hands, letting out a ragged sob. "My father was appalled," Emily said, sitting down at the table. "He said if he had known, he would have dragged you by the collar to fetch your dad himself." She turned to Daniel, her eyes sharp. "We're selling the sports car, we're canceling the country club, and tomorrow morning we're going to the bank together to figure out how to pay our own bills." She looked back at me, her expression softening into deep respect. "Thank you, Richard. Not for the money, for stopping." That afternoon they left together, not as a wealthy couple living an illusion, but as 2 people about to do the hard, honest work of rebuilding a marriage from the foundation up. 3 days later, I received a phone call from my banker, Melissa, back in Knoxville. Mr. Hale, she said warmly, I just wanted to let you know that your son's lender called to verify that your recurring transfer was permanently canceled. They mentioned Daniel contacted them yesterday to apply for a hardship restructuring plan. Did they approve it? I asked. Conditionally, she replied. If they make 3 consecutive payments on their own, the bank will waive the default penalties. It looks like he's taking responsibility. I smiled faintly. That's all I ever wanted. Over the next 2 months, I heard bits and pieces of news through mutual friends and my neighbor Frank. Daniel sold his luxury truck and bought a 10-year-old work van. He let go of his subcontractors and started going back to job sites himself, carrying lumber, pouring concrete, and putting in 12-hour days alongside his workers. Emily took a part-time job at a local bakery to help cover their groceries. They didn't call me to ask for help. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't offer it. Then, exactly 3 months after that terrible evening in Nashville, a simple white envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a handwritten letter from Daniel. No fancy printed stationery, no corporate logo, just his handwriting on a piece of lined notebook paper. Dad, I know I can't undo what I did at the wedding. I can't give you back the respect I stole from you, and I can't undo the lies I told. But we made our second mortgage payment on our own this morning. If you're willing, Emily and I would love for you to come to dinner this Sunday at 5 o'clock. There's no party, no big crowd, no business contacts, just us. I already saved you a seat right at the head of the table. Love, Daniel. I read that letter 3 times. Then I walked out to my truck, placed Linda's walnut keepsake box on the passenger seat, and made the 4-hour drive back to Franklin. When I pulled into their driveway that Sunday afternoon, the house looked different. The expensive sports car was gone. The manicured lawn landscaping service signs were gone. But in the driveway stood Daniel's battered work van, covered in dry drywall dust and ladder racks. When I walked up to the front porch, Daniel opened the door before I could even knock. He looked thinner, his hands were calloused, and he was wearing a simple flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, but his eyes were clear. The heavy, anxious fog that had hung over him for 3 years was completely gone. Dad, he said softly. Hello, son, I replied. He didn't say another word. He just stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me in a tight, desperate hug. I held him back, feeling the tension finally drain out of his shoulders. Inside, the house smelled of pot roast and fresh bread, the exact same meal Linda used to make every Sunday afternoon. Emily greeted me with a warm hug, and for the first time in months, the air felt clean. Before we sat down for dinner, Daniel walked over to the side table in the living room and picked up a framed photograph. He handed it to me. It was a picture from their wedding day. But it wasn't the staged photo with Emily's wealthy family. Someone had professionally restored the photo from the ceremony entrance. There I was, standing right beside my son in my dark navy funeral suit, smiling proudly with his hand on my shoulder. I had a local photographer edit it, Daniel said, his voice cracking. Not to pretend I didn't make a mistake, Dad, but to remind me every day where you always belonged. We sat down at the kitchen table. Right at the head of the table sat an empty wooden chair waiting for me. I set Linda's walnut keepsake box right in the center, opened the lid, and pulled out her handwritten recipe cards. Emily smiled through her tears as she took the cards, touching the faded cursive writing. She would be so proud of you, Richard. She would be proud of all of us, I said gently, for finally choosing the truth. Healing doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen with one big speech or a pile of money. It happens one kept promise at a time, one honest day at a time, one boundary held firm with love. As I drove back home to Knoxville that night under the starry Tennessee sky, the road didn't feel long at all. The walnut keepsake box sat open on my passenger seat, now holding Linda's recipes, Daniel's handwritten letter, and the new family photograph. If you're watching this today, maybe there's someone in your own life you've been enabling out of love, or someone you've been afraid to set a boundary with. Remember that real love doesn't mean protecting people from the consequences of their choices. Sometimes, the greatest gift you can give someone is stepping back so they can learn to stand on their own 2 feet. Thank you for spending your time with me today on Father's Raw Justice. Please leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts on Richard and Daniel's story. What would you have done if you were in Richard's shoes? And if this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, share it with a friend who might need to hear it, and subscribe to join us for our next journey of family, boundaries, and quiet justice. Take care of yourselves and take care of the people who truly love you.